Good evening. Today is February 16th. Monday was a holiday, but S&P 500 futures didn't take a break and made new highs after hours of 39.59 after a brief pause at Soji 50 level. Then we sold off after the 50 level failed to hold and closed today at 39.25 or so, down around 5 points. Nasdaq closed down around 56 points, and Russell again underperformed and had a down day around 0.75%. And Bitcoin has made new highs, finally crossing the 50 level as Victor predicted over the weekend, actually today. And MicroStrategy, which we talked about before, speaking of Bitcoin, announced that it proposes private offering of 600 million of convertible notes to buy Bitcoin. That's after they have already purchased a lot of coins, which are now worth over 3.5 billion. Since they started allocation into their Bitcoin, the MicroStrategy stock price has increased over 750%. But what I really don't understand, they're buying Bitcoin. It's not really a productive asset for them. They're just holding it on the books. So why would people invest into the company instead of simply just buying Bitcoin? I don't know. Also, oil was up 1% today as global warming, climate change hit hard this weekend and left millions without power. It spread across 15 states, froze the wind turbines, snowed over the solar panels, closed refineries. But, like Zero Hedge said, Trump is no longer president, so they have nobody to blame for it. Otherwise, they would have tried to impeach him for the third time. It's too bad people are afraid of nuclear power because I think that's a lot more sustainable for the future than solar or wind. In other interesting news today, Bill Gates said that rich nations should shift entirely to synthetic beef. Well, I personally wouldn't take advice from him, given that he especially looks much older than his age, even with being the billionaire and having access to all of the latest medical technologies. He's not really an example of health. And on top of this, I prefer real meat, not grown in the lab or made from the beans. Is he really trying to stop the cattle from grazing? Is that why he's one of the largest landowners in the United States? And people then get surprised why we have conspiracy theories. And speaking of conspiracy theories, Vice President Kamala Harris has been taking calls with the world leaders on the behalf of President Biden. She spoke with Macron of France and Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau. Where is Biden and why is she taking over? Gold was down today over 1.5%. And of course, bonds made new lows again. I'm sure Victor would love to talk more about this. And I'd like to ask you also a few questions about your tweets over the weekend. So maybe we can start with bonds and also with you tweeting that you have reduced all your longs to 0%. Have you turned bearish?
I was bearish for a day. Now I'm bullish.
All your longs are now at zero. Are you back in the market?
I'm back in the market bullish.
Let me ask you about your other tweet, Florida. You were tweeting that Florida is doing so great and that's why they want to close access to it.
I believe that we should look at things in a larger perspective. And in the larger perspective, Florida is a nail that's sticking out. There basically we had a non-woke concatenation of events over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that's why the market went down. And one of the non woke things is that Florida, without any lockdown and without any global cooling, was able to have a lower rate of COVID and deaths than California or other comparable states. Now that can't be, they can't allow a non-woke thing to happen. What we saw over the weekend was a tremendous conciliation or harmonization. Everything achieved its goals. The market has a certain beauty in it. I like to play a song from the Mikado. There is beauty in the bellow of the blast. And he talks about there being beauty in everything. And anyway, there was beauty in what we've been talking about for several weeks. The Nikkei finally achieved the beautiful number of 30,000. What's it been, 20 years since it was there again? Bitcoin achieved the beautiful number of 50,000. Russia, the Russian index was something like, was up 2.5%. Is that a new high? The S&P went through 3950. It's on its way to 40,000. And why did this all happen? I think it was very bad for the market that there was a freeze all over. One of the major planks of the new administration is that we have to increase our emphasis on non-fossil fuels, have more wind power, more natural gas. But what happened? The windmills froze.
Right.
And there were a few million people in Texas that are without power. Now, we mentioned that before the weekend. Another straw in the haystack was that there was a crash in Fort Worth of 110 cars. Now, why did that occur? They had never had weather like this at this stage before. So that was that's sort of, it's like if you're playing athletics and somehow your whole game plan hits a problem. You're hitting, sport I know about in a racket sport, you're playing a person's backhand, and all of a sudden you hit it. Like Federer used to have a terrible backhand, and Sampras had a terrible backhand. You hit it to a person's backhand, and he's beating you, and it really upsets the entire game plan. It's amazing with all the things that happened that were non-woke over the weekend. The market wasn't down more than from 39.59, it got down to 39.19 or so. Only got down 40 points from the high. On school choice, they keep delaying it. the unions don't wish to allow the schools to open. They come up with one excuse after another. In the meanwhile, they're all getting paid, as all government employees do. So then they don't understand the problems of a lockdown. In New York, Governor Cuomo took a vicious response to all the criticism of him that he created thousands of deaths in the nursing homes by ordering all the older people from hospitals to nursing homes, and then he refused to report it. Originally, he attributed it all to Trump, that it was Trump's fault, but somehow that doesn't work anymore. So there was very bad non-woke news. The cancel culture continues to grow apace. In San Francisco, they're persisting in changing the names of all the public schools and high schools there to get rid of, amazingly, on President's Day they're being ashamed of George Washington. It used to be that we have one holiday for George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Now we lump them all together, and it's given 1/5 the attention of Black lives. There's been a lot of talk now. Florida is afraid that there'll be a travel ban on Florida, and what will be the purpose of to make Florida look bad, to ruin the economy in Florida, so that it doesn't stand out as a positive aspect of human happiness.
I don't think it's going to work, because every day I ran into random people. Like yesterday on the beach, some guy was saying how he wants to move to Florida because it's great weather and it's a lot cheaper than New York. And people are coming to Florida to vacation, to visit, to move. Its ban is not going to stop it. And I think you were also tweeting about Flagler, who is the founder of Palm Beach and Miami.
To the book, Road to the Highway to Key West, and all of Flagler's contributions to the economy. Flagler's a man like Elon Musk. He's adventurous and productive, ingenious. He's not as flamboyant as Elon Musk, but in other aspects, he was once the second richest man in the world. He started out as a partner for John Rockefeller, and he owned half as much of Standard Oil as Rockefeller. And he was such a rudder, a man of accomplishment that you could count on. He kept rising in the organization. Rockefeller died with an estate of in the billions. Flagler could have had that same estate, but instead he wanted to accomplish something that no one had ever accomplished before, and he built railroads all over the. Now I've been thinking about delicatessens.
Right, you were tweeting about the wolfies.
Well, let's start with Katz's.
Right, Cats. I have been there. It's
You've been to Katz's.
Yes, it's the best pastrami sandwich.
Actually, there are comparable ones. The pastrami queen is probably a better pastrami, but certainly the ambience in Katz's there.
Right. You can't beat the experience, the lines, the numbers, the whole thing.
Well, I'll tell you how the numbers work. When I was 7 years old, there were a lot of degenerates and derelicts who frequented Katz's, in addition to all the Jewish people who, for dietary reasons, had to have no cooking, no cooking on Sabbath, and they came from the old country where they had to keep their meat, store their meat, smoke it. Anyway, Katz had some policemen who stood at the checking counter and gave out the tickets. And my father was a policeman, Artie was a policeman there. And I'd go in there and we'd go in with his partner, Milty Cohen, who was the toughest cop in the neighborhood. And when Milty got to the ticket counter, he'd have a few pastrami's and corned beef and French fries and some potato latkes, and Ruby, who was a football player, former football player, and a former policeman, would just say, "Oh, go right ahead, Milty. You don't have to pay." You know, they like to have a policeman there to keep order. Then my father would go there with a corned beef sandwich and two corned beef sandwiches and a coffee. And he'd present his ticket, and Ruby would say, 480. My father would say, "Oh, you say 480? You just let him go for nothing." And he said, "Oh." And then Ruby would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the coffee. That will be $6." 50 years later, I visited my grandmother in Miami. My grandfather, who was one of the brightest and most astute men you could ever imagine. He spoke about 50 languages. He was a court interpreter, and he came in second on the court clerk's test. But he was suffering from Alzheimer's. So my father and I came out to visit him in Miami. We visited the wife, Bertie. Where did Bertie want to go? She wanted to go to Wolfie's. And Wolfie's, who was there at Wolfie's? Who was the cashier? But Ruby. Same person. My father was a great football player, but in those days, the Jewish teams from Brooklyn were paid to go out and play teams like Notre Dame, and they'd lose something like 70-3. My grandfather Martin wrote a letter similar to the kind that I write for my kids. And he wrote to the coach, "How could you take out an all American like Artie when he was involved in every pass, every tackle?" In those days, they played both ways on the game. And the coach read the letter in the locker room. My father was so embarrassed that everybody kidded him and made fun of him for the rest of his career at Brooklyn College. He also was a letterman in wrestling and boxing. All the players called him All American. So there I was I'm in Wolfie's with my father and grandfather, and a football player from Brooklyn College, they were all Jewish, came in. First thing he said, "Hey, all American, how you doing?" Talking to my father. Anyway, I was inspired over the weekend by the podcast, the the, the way I heard it by Mike Meyer, which I recommend to everybody. He was a barbershop quartet singer, and he had a million ways of Niederhoffering Hollywood. He used to get a job in television works that he knew were going to fail in a few months. You get paid more for those few months. He describes a million instances where he neither offered the Hollywood infrastructure. The market was incredibly strong today, and that's why I covered my shorts. Refused to go down. And now we have the typical situation where it was a 20-day high on Friday, holiday on Monday, but then down 5 or 6 from Friday's close. So we have a decline after a 20-day high. You mentioned that Kamala Harris is taking calls
Right.
from the foreign leaders. I think that's very significant. Also, significant is what they call the Confucius. This is a Communist Party organization, and they contribute to a lot of the universities, organizations, foundations in the U.S. And there was a bill to make them report, to make all these organizations that are receiving subsidies from the Confucius organizations in China, they were going to have to report how much money they received and whether they were receiving it. But that bill was overturned. We've had 50 executive orders from Joe Biden. Everything, pursuit of school choices is being put back. Restaurants are in New York are forced to have a 25% of their seating capacity. Everything is happening to reduce the pursuit of happiness. There was a funny thing that happened to me also. For some reason, I received more followers on Twitter in the last day than I had in the previous 3 years. Now, I believe that maybe the algorithms found out that we always say the more woke it is, the more bullish it is. The fact that we said it was non-woke and that was why it was down today. Well, yeah, the big business, the media, the tech firms, they're all against pursuit of happiness. They all make money the more woke there are. So anyway, I was very surprised, but I'm sure after this little discussion where I talked about all the pursuit of happiness, reducing things, and that's the Declaration of Independence, in case anybody remembers. I expect to lose all those followers. But it would be very good if some people were to follow us on this blog. We put a lot of effort into it, but try to talk about a lot of general principles. We talked about the harmony today. We talked about the um, achieving the various goals. That has to be tested, but I tested that in 19. I tested that almost 70 years ago. What happens when a stock goes above 10? What happens if you buy? No, as those days, the stock that went above 10 was like going up above 100 today. If you bought all the stocks that went above 10 and went above 100, you would have made a 5 or 6 times as much as the 50,000 fold a century. There's quite a bit of statistical evidence that the market goes to these constructal levels. Professor Biden, who's a good friend, has written a number of books and where he applies the constructal levels to airplanes and basketball and pole vaulting. Talks about so modification of the theory of least effort. Anyway, that's a very good general principle. Now we're below 39.50. We'll have to go back above there again. Bull market, as Mr. Partridge said, we're still in a bull market, and the fact that we could only go down 5-10 points today is proof that we're still in a bull market.
And what about bonds? Do you have any prediction about bonds?
Well, it keeps going down. We had a consilience of 3 greens and 7 yellows in the last few days. It was just a few days ago that the bonds were in the 168 handle. Now they were threatening to go below 164. They have to go down because we're spending money fruitlessly for log jamming purposes and for buying votes, and all this money is going to eventually going to have to be paid back. There's a lot of money. The money supply keeps increasing. The Fed's holdings of dollars increases, and Janet Yellen keeps talking about the fact that we need more spending to bail out the economy. The economy is so strong now. I don't know how it could be stronger, but still the bonds have gone down 4 points in the last 4 or 5 days. I think we have to give it a few days to bounce back for a little bit. Then it will start going down again. Anyway, we had a red day today, which is the first red day we've had in a Pope's death.
But you don't think the move in bonds is going to catch up to the stock market, equities market?
No, I don't. In 1987, which everybody remembers, the yields got up to around 8%, and it still didn't bring the S&P down. The S&P went up from 280 to like 500, and even Jim Laurie reduced his 100% longs to 0%. He hedged it with some futures. It kept going up and up. And then the only thing that brought it down was when Secretary of State Baker said that we have to reduce, that he's going to weaken the dollar unless Germany falls into line. That immediately caused about a 25% decline in the stock market, and that was what did it. But now it's still at 1.5% and a 10-year yield, and a little over 2% with a 30-year yield. No problem for the stock market. If we get above 3% and 4% in the 30-year yield, then we can start comparing it to other massive declines.
And another question about your tweet. You tweeted that cattle trader, who is usually right on point, calls for a crash. That's very dangerous and ruinous. Who is the cattle trader? And
well, he's one of our followers. He's a very, very smart guy, and I've seen hundreds of my colleagues and hundreds of market seers call for a market decline in the last 10 years, and almost all of them, you can't make a bearish call for the S&P on a long-term basis. How can you go against a 50,000-fold a century return, which is something like 750% a year if you look at the algebraic changes? So when you're going against that kind of, but that leads me to the fact that Goldman Sachs is giving customers the benefit of their special algorithms for blending between stocks and bonds. What we have here is the 8 million new Robinhood investors and small investors again. And they're fighting against the highest trophic levels, the highest feeders, the people who have more capital. And it was so easy for them to lose money. And now there's talk of some of them made money from $8 to $50, but in terms of volume, there was probably 10 times as much volume lost from $50 to $380. I know some people who sold the GameStop at $350, and they were margined out. The spreads are so high, the margins are so onerous, and the strong are so much better equipped than the weak. Eventually, all these people will lose money. They'll keep going. They'll keep trying to fight against the higher trophic levels. And there'll be one repeated devastation after another. And to make matters worse, the SEC and the CFTC are holding hearings now, and they're likely to punish the people who tried to make a profit by going against the infrastructure, by going against Citadel, and so on.
So what do you think about the 60-40 allocation, that because you were mentioning bonds and stocks, do you recommend people just...
Oh, I recommend 100% stocks.
Right.
the worst possible time to go from 2% to the bonds have just gone down for 4 points. But if you look at the studies of Dimson, Marsh, and Sutton, they've shown that the stock returns have been about 3% a year compounded more than bonds. Now, it's true that in the last few years, with all the Fed buying and the quantitative easing, bonds have done pretty well. But in my opinion, this is the worst time to, and that's why we'll see a lot of algorithms recommending that the public go into 80% bonds, 20% stocks. And so Jim Laurie was the person who taught all the big funds that they should be 100% in stocks, and that's been very bad because the TIAA, which is where all the professors have automatically put 15% of their salaries into a fund, and they've probably been about 80-90% stocks. So all the professors from 30-40 years ago, they're worth $3, $5, $7 million. They don't understand that what's caused all the gains is people like Henry Flagler and Elon Musk. Well, that's enough for today. I have a lot of things on tap for tomorrow.
Sounds good. Maybe
Thank
at
you.
some point we could talk about Ray Dalio and his.
Oh, that's ridiculous. He's he's like the sage of Nebraska. He's giving advice that's in line with the woke ideas and trying to help the administration along. The more effort will be put to reduce individuality and get the government involved, more progressive things will become. And that's a very bad long-term trend, but it doesn't affect the next few weeks. If we have a few more 20-day highs and the stock market goes above 4,000 S&P, then we'll review the thing again and talk about whether there's been enough harmony for the stock market to start going down again. Thank you very much.